Member for Boundary Similkameen.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It's spring and a time to celebrate, but as the snow melts and the rains arrive, communities in the Otter and Similkameen Valleys in my riding begin watching the water levels closely. Because for them, flooding is not a theoretical risk. It is a question they ask every spring and increasingly every time heavy rainstorms arrive. Will our community be safe this time? It is a question I hear often from residents across my riding, and one I have to ask myself as well, who lives along the river. British Columbians will remember the atmospheric rivers of 2021, which caused catastrophic flooding across our province. Communities were cut off, homes were destroyed, and entire neighborhoods and communities like Princeton and Tulameen were underwater. And as devastating as that flooding was, the damage did not end there. Temperatures dropped soon after, and those floodwaters froze, expanding and compounding the destruction those communities face and were already struggling to recover from. This past winter, we have experienced 3 atmospheric rivers that again pushed rivers and creeks beyond their banks across the valley. For many residents along these rivers, every major rainfall brings real anxiety. People watch the forecast. They watch the river levels. They start lifting their belongings. They start filling sandbags. And they remember what happened last time. During these rain events, people are up all night walking the riverbanks, and first responders are preparing, knowing there's little they can do except to help people get to safety if the river rises again. That constant uncertainty is taking a mental toll on the communities and well-being of the people who live there. Honourable Speaker, one of the challenges in our valley is that flood protection is often approached community by community, rather than viewed from a watershed perspective. But we all know that rivers, lakes, and tributaries do not have municipal boundaries. When one community strengthens their dikes or their mitigation, the risk just moves downstream to the next community. So protecting one section of river without addressing the entire system can increase risk for communities further along the valley. Residents need a coordinated, watershed-wide strategy that protects communities together. Honourable Speaker, another serious concern in the valley is the presence of orphaned dikes. These aging infrastructure no longer have a clearly defined owner responsible for maintaining them. Communities like Tulameen and Keremeos rely on them as their only flood protection in these events. And today, no one is clearly responsible for maintaining them. And just as concerning is no one has the legal authority to do the maintenance or repairs on them either. Authorization and funding only become available once the emergency has been declared. In other words, the only time we can legally work on these is when the river is already rising. During that atmospheric event in 2021, the Similkameen rose over 4 meters in a single day. That is 12 feet in 24 hours. So we have no ability to prepare for that until that's already coming up, and now we have hours to try to maintain our safety of our communities. That is not a strategy, it is only a gamble. The other issue we face is that many First Nations along the Similkameen River are not fully included in our provincial flood mitigation planning because their lands fall under federal jurisdiction. But as I mentioned before, water does not recognize jurisdictional boundaries. If First Nations communities are excluded from planning, gaps remain that affect everyone along that river. So true watershed planning must include all communities along the system. But Honourable Speaker, these communities cannot manage these challenges alone. Flood mitigation often costs tens of millions of dollars, far beyond the tax base of communities like Tulameen, Princeton, Headley, Keremeos, or even Chipaka. The Similkameen Valley needs a coordinated flood mitigation strategy with investment from all levels of government. Because families who live along that river, flood mitigation is not a policy exercise. And I wish I was only talking about the Similkameen Valley that's at risk. But as the opposition critic for water, lands, and resource stewardship, I know these government failures repeat themselves across British Columbia. This is simply the story I'm sharing today as one of those residents who 3 times this winter watched the rain forecast, looked at the snowpack, and checked river gauges every hour from behind the Orphan Dyke in Keremeos. So until we have a government that will prioritize investment on infrastructure that prevents emergencies rather than only providing funding to respond to them, families like mine will keep watching the river instead of sleeping when the rain begins. Thank you.